Good morning and welcome to Her Laundry Unfolded. I'm Wendy Babcock. And this morning I'm joined by Heather Ryder. I'm so excited to have you this morning.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you as well, Wendy.
Yeah, and I think as people join us this morning and hear what you've been able to accomplish, I think they're going to be pretty impressed and excited about it. So I'm just going to jump right in and let you just introduce yourself, and then we'll just talk about some challenges you've been through.
Great. Well, yes, my name is Vern. I'm an anxiety coach and an imposter syndrome educator. So I definitely will let you kind of maybe drive the conversation in a minute, since you know your audience really well. But I guess the short story is I used to work in technology in Austin, where I live. I had a pretty demanding job, and I'm divorced, and I've always been the primary caregiver for my daughters. And I didn't know that when I was working in technology, I was struggling with high functioning anxiety and imposter syndrome. I didn't know anything about high functioning anxiety, and I found that a lot of people don't know about it either. You can kind of think of it as like hidden anxiety, because we've got a dog.
Yeah, my husband just left. Sorry about that.
I might have a cat meow, so we'll have like a zoo going on.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So anyway, I just, I didn't know that I was struggling with high functioning anxiety, because I thought anxiety looked a specific way, but it doesn't necessarily look that way at all. And so I know we'll dive into really what my life was like, because it sucked. It's the short story. Like, it sucked really bad for years, because I had no idea I was struggling. And so I'm really passionate kind of about helping other people understand about high functioning anxiety and imposter syndrome. The two actually tend to be pretty related for people. And I would imagine there's a lot of women who are watching who have struggled with perfectionism. And that's a big part of high functioning anxiety and imposter syndrome as well.
Yeah, and I definitely identify with both of those things, especially coming into the entrepreneur world. And I mean, I know when I feel like situational anxiety, but the high functioning anxiety, as you're describing it, yeah, that's me to a T a lot of times. Just for a quick example, I've gone through surgical menopause. And so I was getting like heart palpitations, and I thought, oh gosh, this must be menopause related. You know, you can get those. But when my physician put me on an anti-anxiety type of medication, those went away. And I realized it was anxiety that I didn't even realize it.
Yes, that's really important to note. And I'm glad you mentioned that. It's extremely common for people to have anxiety play out in a different part of their body. And that can be a cue, but it can be mistaken for something else. But the heart thing that you mentioned, cardiopulmonary emergencies are the biggest ER visit in this country. And the vast majority of the time, they are not health related at all. It's because of anxiety. And I've had clients, multiple clients, one of whom was very in great health, go to the ER because she thought she was having like a heart attack. And it's not, it's people's anxiety. It's extremely common.
Yeah, and I really didn't think I had much stress or anxiety. I thought, gosh, why am I having, I don't feel like I'm anxious. I don't feel like I have a lot of stress. Things are going okay. And then when that happened, it was just like that epiphany. I'm like, oh my gosh, it really was anxiety. It was an underlying, like you said, high functioning anxiety.
Right. So it's like the same sort of thing that you're mentioning. I mean, when I had anxiety, I thought that people who had anxiety, first of all, I'll say, I'm not sure what I thought, right? Like, but I thought, oh, somebody who's having panic attacks all the time, right. So, you know, like fill in the blank. And I was like, well, that's not me. So I thought I'm not having anxiety. But what I was having was, I describe it as like these two sort of opposite ends. I would have what's called rumination. So it's like your mind playing something over and over and over. So I would think about like conversations that I had with people or things that I did where I thought, oh, that was anxiety. It's extremely common.
Make sure we're on live. Sorry, go ahead. I apologize.
So I would have this rumination where I'd be thinking about things over and over and over in my mind, like conversations that I'd had, like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have said that. I should have said that differently. When they said that, I should have said this, right? And when I say I was thinking about it in my mind, I don't mean, oh, for like, you know, half an hour after the conversation or something happened. I mean, sometimes for weeks I would do it, like pop back in my mind, and I would just like churn it over and over and over. And if I wasn't doing that, I was thinking about the future, and I'd be worried about potential things that might happen, right? That I thought were big enough of a deal for me to worry about. And so then I would make like strategies in my mind. This is called future tripping, by the way. I would like make strategies in my mind and think, okay, if this happens, this is how I could respond, like A, B, or C. But if that doesn't happen, this might happen, and this is how I could respond, right? And so I was like playing mental chess in my mind. And so I was doing those all of the time, either the past or the future, and I wasn't in the present moment. And that was just like mentally exhausting. Yeah. So that's how my anxiety was really playing out. And I did have body things happening, but I just was like, oh, I'm not having panic attacks, right? Like, as I mentioned. So I just thought, while I knew what I was doing in my head, it seemed a bit extreme. Like, oh, do people really think about conversations for like 2 weeks? Mm-hmm. I still kind of thought everybody did that. Like, I thought that was sort of normal because I had been doing it in some ways for my entire life. It was just, I would like ebb and flow at different times, but that's not normal. Like, that's not
right. No, that's a great description of it. And I don't think people, and myself included, I was always one of those people who would hang on to those conversations and play it over. I'd go to bed and I couldn't let it go and I couldn't get to sleep. And so that definitely was that aha moment when I started taking a medication for it, that I was like, oh my gosh, I was really dealing with anxiety and stress that I didn't realize I even had. So how was this playing out in your day-to-day life then? Were you having problems with sleep or any other issues?
Yeah, so I definitely had insomnia because, like you said, I could always go to sleep. That usually wasn't the problem. I would either wake up in the middle of the night, and I'm not kidding, the second I would wake up, it'd be this dialogue in my head, like, what day is it? What do you have to do? What, and I'd like start running through a mental checklist. Or I would, like you said, be playing something out, like wake up and be like bothered by that thing that I was thinking about. It would immediately pop back into my mind. Mm-hmm. And it played out in really interesting ways too. There is this phenomenon, it's called lost time. When you have high functioning anxiety, and that makes it sound like you were blacked out or something. That's not what it is. It's that when you're like overcompensating and over strategizing, you're spending so much time thinking about things that you're losing time actually doing them. Or also, I would like show up for appointments really, really early because in my mind, I'd be like, okay, let's say I have to be there at 11. This is how long it's going to take there. But what if there's traffic and I have to go a different way, and like plan my routes or something? None of those things would happen. And then I'd show up a half an hour early doing nothing, right? So it's like ironic because then it's totally unproductive and a waste of time. But then I felt crunched for time all of the time because I had so many things that I was doing. But I would say the major way that this was affecting my life is it affected my relationship with my daughters. I just was like mentally exhausted all of the time. And because I had this like control issue and perfectionism issue, I would get upset with them over the stupidest things, right? I would just be like, that's what I felt like inside. Although on the outside, I looked really calm, but on the it was just like, oh my God, I'd be freaking out all of the time. And so I'd get upset with them over homework and why they didn't do things a certain way. And, and I would just wind up screaming at them. And I don't mean just yelling at them. I always tell people I was screaming at them and I would be like so remorseful after I had done it. I would just feel awful. And I would vow to myself like, oh my God, I'm never going to do that again. Mm-hmm. And then I'd doing it again, sometimes not for weeks, but sometimes it would be days later. And I really didn't know how to stop.
Wow. I feel like you just described my life when my kids were, in junior high school. Cause I totally felt that way. And I have control issues as well. And so I always felt like I was always like this ticking time bomb, and little things would come up and you're like, you have this crazy reaction. Everyone's like, why are you getting this upset about it? And
like so totally disproportionate to what had happened. Yeah,
exactly. And then my kids are like, oh my gosh, did I do that? Was it that bad? And then of course the remorse kicks in and we've had conversations now that they're both adults and we've talked about a lot of those issues. So it's fascinating listening to you talk because you're describing exactly what my life was like, not quite 10 years ago. It's crazy.
I had a feeling that you would be seeing these things. I mean, just even though this is, I don't know you, and so this is our first meeting, but I did look into your background, and you are obviously caring about women and women's lives, but it would take a successful person to run a live stream show. And I don't know if you know that about yourself, right? It's not like just anybody. It's like you would be a certain kind of person to even do this and have the confidence to do this.
Okay.
And so it's like, I'm sure a very specific type of person is watching this, and I magnetize a specific type of client as well. And it's these really high achieving, goal-oriented women who are suffering in ways that are not always apparent. And that's what we've been getting at. And it really is like our relationships that wind up suffering, and our physical bodies. Like when you distill all of this down of like, how is this junk affecting our lives? It's in those two ways, predominantly health and relationships.
Yeah. And of course, there's always like unhealthy ways that we cover that up. I mean, for me, sometimes I'll be scrolling on TikTok and I'll lose hours, because it makes me think of things other than the stresses and anxieties or what I have to do tomorrow. And I procrastinate when I do that. So getting out of that is like, wake up, come on, do your stuff.
Yeah, those are called avoidance techniques. It's like we have things that we will do to like numb ourselves. And so social media, sometimes eating, other people clean a lot. Those are things that I've heard. Exercise, right? It's like, how can you avoid feeling whatever you're feeling and like default to something else, so you don't have to pay attention to what's making you feel the way that you're feeling.
Yeah, that's incredible. So how did you discover that this is what was going on and kind of transition into helping others? Where was that mindset shift, or where did you discover it? And I'm sorry if my dog's bark again.
Yeah. I say it was a brick upside the head, because I didn't understand the gravity of what was going on. And what happened was I got really sick. So I had been in this chronic, stress level elevated thing, and my body basically started attacking itself. I had a really severe autoimmune reaction.
Wow.
And at that time, I basically gave up on Western medicine. I went and saw a couple of doctors, and they just were not any help at all. I don't need to tell the whole story. And I was like, I've got to heal myself holistically. So I started doing a lot of research. And this is what's interesting, right? This is mind-body connection. When I started focusing on healing my physical body, that's when I started getting the emotional healing that I didn't know that I needed, because I started to have to like really address long-standing patterns. Like it got bad enough where I was like, okay, Heather, you've got to start doing something differently here. And so I was ready and open to, because I was at such a critical stage. It was like, I need something different. And so I started working on my physical health through a bunch of different, holistic methods. And because I was ready, that phrase, like when the student is ready, the teacher appears sort of thing. Like the stuff started to come into my sphere that I had not had before. And it was much more like spiritually based things started, coming at me. And I was like, oh, I'm going to listen to this audiobook, and I'm going to start journaling, which I'd never done before.
Wow.
Just doing a lot of different things that really started to open me up and shift me in some pretty profound ways.
Isn't that kind of amazing in a way? And I've had similar experiences where you get to that place where there's only one decision, and you know that you have to make a change. Like there's no going backwards again. Like that you have to, and the word pivot's been so overused this year, but when you basically have to pivot. And it's amazing how things all of a sudden that you didn't see before are popping up. Like you said, all these different things that now you're aware of, and you see them when you make that decision. So it just, when I talk to people who have had that same experience, it's like all of a sudden, like, the blinders are off and things start showing up in your experience that you're able to implement that. So it's interesting to me when every time I hear it, I'm like, it's amazing if people would take the blinders off, how things show up for you to, implement and grab onto.
I've basically heard the same thing. I know so many women who, have my story is similar. Like they wound up getting really sick, and that was the wake up call for them. And when things start to, quote unquote, appear, it's like they're ready and they start to see synchronicities in their life and they just start to trust, well, I guess I'm supposed to go down this path and I'll be led over here. And I never would have done that before, but I guess I'll try it now. Like, what have I got to lose? And it is when you are willing to step out of the comfort zone and those like entrenched patterns, right? If like you break the pattern, that means subconsciously you are being different. Like you're willing to try something different. And that alone is like a mindset shift of recognizing, well, what's the common denominator in this? It's me. Like I kept doing the thing. I've got to do something different. And that openness and willingness, that's why I said like, the student is ready. That's when it's like the universe is like, okay, we're going to start to give you the things that you need because you've acknowledged you're ready. You want something different. We'll like hand you those things.
Yeah. And I think that saying too is about, we teach what we most need to learn ourselves. And I think that's true of most coaches and teachers is we're teaching things that, kind of reinforces it in ourselves. And sometimes we forget to take our own advice. I know I fall into that trap where I'm teaching people about mindset and these different things. And I'm like, oh, you need to start listening and doing those things you're telling your clients to do.
That's funny that you said that because every once in a while that'll happen to me too. Like I was having a pain. This was a couple of years ago now, but I was having this pain in my knee. It was so bad that I like couldn't walk up the stairs. And so I went and got a massage and then I was like, oh, that didn't work. I'm going to go to the chiropractor and that didn't work, and like weeks are elapsing between these things. Yeah. And then I went to an acupuncturist, and as she's like putting needles in me, I look at her and I go, maybe this has something to do with like some emotional thing. I was like, oh my God, they're like, this is the stuff that you like work with people about. And this. And she, said something to me and it was like, oh my gosh, it was just right there in front of me. And so, yeah, every once in a while I'm like, oh yeah, Heather, you've got to remember for yourself. And we do get our little like blinders on.
Right. So, we're not perfect either. We mess up and we forget things and we are so focused on everybody else. We kind of forget to do those things ourselves. Right. So how did you decide then, obviously then you go through your kind of transformation, you learn these things and you're implementing some really great, more natural ways to help your anxiety. How do you then shift into coaching do you call it coaching or is it like a mentorship?
Yeah, I say I'm an anxiety coach and specialist. We only have so much time, right? So it's like I still was working in my corporate job for years and I was just doing all of these different things on my own. I became an energy healer, a number of like anything that became interesting to me for myself, I would just follow. I was like, oh, that sounds cool. I'm going to go over here and do that. That sounds cool. I'm going to go over here and do that. And so what I didn't realize is that I was building up a tool set and a methodology set to help my clients. And I went and moved from one company to another. I was making the most money I had ever made. And I wound up being just really dissatisfied with my job and really bored. Just like, why am I bored? I'm making the most money I've ever made. Like it looks like I should be happy externally and I'm not. And I was like, what is going on here? And then it was like that reflection of, oh, wait a minute. Like I was helping people like on the side on my own.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I'm already doing all of these things. And so it just became obvious to me, oh, my work and part of why I'm bored is I'm over here doing this thing that I really am not called to do anymore. It's not serving me. And like you said, it's like all of the experiences led me to help the previous version of me. Right. And so it's like I then left the corporate job. I was working simultaneously, like I started my business and kept my corporate job for about 6 months. I was getting my business going. But I just knew that I needed to help other women really transform their lives.
That's awesome. And I've been through before, like with, you talk to branding experts about creating that avatar. And generally your avatar, your ideal client ends up being who you were when you were first finding out these different techniques and in the learning process. So it's always interesting when I talk to people, as they describe it, it's like, this is what I needed. So I learned it, so now I can help somebody else. So when you're reaching your ideal client, it's usually a former version of yourself.
It's true. That's absolutely true. And that's the kind of people that I work with are typically former versions of me. It's like I would say I'm working with probably 90% women who work in the corporate world, and a lot of them work in technology. And some of them are in Austin, where I live, which is the big tech town. But there are people who don't live in Austin that work in technology that find me.
Wow.
And it is because it's like I'm a magnet for them, and they know that I can relate to them because I did work in the corporate environment and I did work in technology. So I understand what their lives are like.
Right.
And they are struggling in the ways that I was struggling. So you're absolutely right. Like from a business perspective, it's like, if we're ever wondering, who's my client? It's you.
Yeah.
You.
Yeah. Because when I was first asked those questions, okay, now how old is your ideal client? I'm like, I gotta think about it, and I gave an age. Okay, well, who is she? Obviously you work with females in my experience, and as I'm describing it, I'm thinking, this is me. It was like that aha, like, because that was the first time I ever had to talk to a branding person. I'm like, this is crazy.
Yeah, it is interesting.
So true.
Yeah. I work with usually women in their mid 30s to sometimes early 50s, but I'm in my 40s, and most of my clients are in their late 30s through their 40s. It's really rare for me to get somebody in their 20s or somebody, even in their 60s. I don't think I've ever worked with anyone even in their 60s.
Yeah, my age range is pretty similar to yours as well. And I think that's part of just life, just learning, what we need, and being to that age where we can reach out and say, okay, I need help with this. Yeah. Sometimes when we're younger, we just try, like we did. I did that too. I just thought, okay, I can self-diagnose this and do it on my own.
Just plow through. Yeah.
Right. So when people contact you then to work with you, what does that look like?
Do you mean like, how do I structure my work with them?
Yeah, that sort of thing. Like when they contact you, they obviously will go, I'm going to put your website up here quick too. So when people contact you through your website, theenergysynergist.com, what happens then?
So usually people are in a critical stage when they're looking for help, which is what we just mentioned, right? They've recognized like, oh my gosh, I need a lot of support. And so after they look through my website, they get on a complimentary transformation call with me. I dig deep with them to really help them open up and be vulnerable and talk about what's not working in their life, and then create a vision for what their life could be like. And then if we're a good fit and I think I can help them and we start working together, I usually work with people anywhere from 3 to 5 months. So a pretty short amount of time, especially compared to like a lot of people who work with me have tried therapy and that hasn't worked for them. And, sometimes people are in therapy for years. And so with me, they work in a much more compressed short amount of time, and then they see results. So I do some very unusual things. We don't need to go into them now, but I'm not a therapist. Okay, so the stuff that I do, is not therapy based at all. It's pretty unusual.
Well, it sounds like it's holistic too. I mean, just so you're kind of treating everything, but in a more natural way, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I do energy work. I do aromatherapy. I do some hypnosis techniques, a lot of things that are just really getting at the root cause of why somebody is feeling the way that they are. And that's how they're able to get results much quicker than other things that they have tried, because we're just like digging in really hard into like the core reasons that they feel the way that they feel, which is super fun. I mean, it can be transformative, but also it's people who are working with me are ready to like address what happened, and it's not always easy, but it's exciting to watch, because most people wind up getting more than what they came for, which is true, I think, with anyone who's working with a coach, right? It's like they have a like core fundamental thing that they want. But when you start to like open up, that's when your world really starts to broaden and you start to get unanticipated outcomes that are amazing as well.
Right. And I've heard that so many times too with, when you advertise things too, it's like, all right, we know what you need, even though you think this is what you want. So people might come in saying, okay, this is this is what this experience is going to be about. But then it's like, it, kind of turns and you're like, oh, wow. I had that experience in therapy before. I thought I was going to therapy for one reason. And then he kept asking me questions, and he was such a great therapist. And it came out, I'm like, holy cow. Like it was like, I was blindsided, like, oh yeah, why didn't I see that? And I imagine your clients have that same experience.
Yeah, the same
where like, whoa, like I didn't expect that to come up, or that was an underlying issue.
Yeah, even if you think about, because there's probably maybe a lot of entrepreneurs watching this, it's like sometimes if you're working with a business coach or something, you're thinking about like, oh, I want my business to go to this way, but then they start uncovering things that are limiting you from getting there, right?
Yes.
And then that's where like people start to get unintended transformation. It's like, oh, I thought we were going to work on this, but to get there, we had to like do this other thing, and then it starts to open up for them.
Yeah, and then imposter syndrome, I think, is probably something that people deal with. I know I definitely have that bubbling up with me, so I might have to contact you after this and maybe have.
Yeah, I don't know if we have time to talk about imposter syndrome at all, but I can say that again, people who are high achieving and have high functioning anxiety, imposter syndrome usually goes in with that as well. And I had imposter syndrome. And again, I did not know that it had a name. I had never heard about it.
Wow.
And I know it's becoming more and more common, but like 8 years ago, I had not heard of it. And I was sitting at work in my corporate job one day, and it felt like the best way to describe this is like I was in a movie and I was acting, but it was my life. Like I was walking through the building and then sitting at my desk working, like I was pretending to do the work that I was actually doing. It made no sense. It's like, but how can I be pretending to do this? I'm actually doing it. So I don't know what I searched in Google. I have no idea. I typed something like feeling like I'm blah, blah, blah.
Right.
The result came up and I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, that has a name. It's imposter syndrome. And I read it and I was like, that is describing me exactly. And I was blown away, and I was like, other people feel this way. And so I immediately reached out to this life coach that I had met fairly recently, like at a singles meetup thing. So it's so weird. She was another person who was, there. And so I started working with her because I recognized it was really holding me back in my career. Because obviously if you think you're faking the work that you're doing, how are you going to like be able to be successful?
Right. That's a huge mindset thing that holds people back. And I fall into that trap quite often where I get going with something, then I'm like, oh gosh, am I a fraud? Are people going to think I'm a fraud? Like, is this, am I really doing this? Like if I do this event, are people really going to think, and I go through that in my mind. It's like kind of like a cycle for me.
And I think that what you just said is actually important, because I actually think that's great, because what I heard you say is, oh, if I do this event, if I do this, and that's when imposter syndrome is coming up, is when we're pushing our envelope, right? And we're pushing our boundaries and we're coming up against the next thing, because it means you're becoming and growing. And if you're stagnant and stuck somewhere, why would you have imposter syndrome? You wouldn't, because you're like comfortable. And so it's when you push yourself to that uncomfortability that those thoughts come in, like, can I do this? So it's actually if you think about it that way, it can be a good sign. It must be like, oh, I'm growing and I'm changing and I'm trying something new. And that's where this doubt is coming from. That means that I'm like on the right track.
That's true. And I find that happening. So it's kind of interesting. It's like we're doing a quick one-on-one session, which is awesome. But, and it's like, especially when I come up against people, like I'll be having speakers come to, speaking at my event, and we're looking at bigger names to draw in, more people. And that terrifies me more than having the events. I'm like, these are people I've learned from. So there's that student teacher relationship, like, well, who am I then to speak? If I have this person on, they're going to think, well, why is she, so that's what goes on in my head sometimes. Like, how can I have this, really successful speaker come on and talk that I've learned from, who's my mentor, who am I then to speak? So it's just working through those feelings and emotions are just, like you said, it's growth and I recognize it, but sometimes I get stuck up in it. I get just kind of planted in it and wallow in it for a day.
Yeah. And that's why I just wanted to say that is for anybody that's watching. I just hope that's helpful to them to think about, oh, this is coming up because I'm pushing into a new zone, a new growth zone. If I were stagnant and playing small, I wouldn't feel this way. And so that lets you know you're on the right track.
Right.
And I mean, I would hope that the speakers that you contact, I'm sure they're very like nice and friendly to you, right? And at some point, all of them were at some stage in their career. And so we all have just like this growth, and, you know, growth isn't linear. And at some point, if they're staying stuck and stagnant, then somebody who's like, quote unquote, below them could leapfrog ahead of them because, right, they're not pushing out of their comfort zone enough, then they will stay stuck where they are.
True. And it's crazy because it's not their personality to be judgmental. So that's the interesting thing to me is like when I have those thoughts, I think, okay, I follow them because they're not judgmental people. They're not, you know, someone who's going to be like, well, she's not quality enough for me to be in that event, you know? So it's ironic that it's my own thoughts creeping up on me saying, you know, you're not good enough. You know, you're not.
You know, this just reminded me of something that I think might be helpful. Are we getting some background noise? I don't know if I'll just keep talking. I recently ran a virtual summit and someone applied. I didn't reach out to her. She applied because I was posting it in a bunch of different speaker Facebook groups. And she is very successful. She has been on all sorts of TV shows. She has like multiple books, but she's trying to take her business a slightly different direction. And so she like opportunities to do that. And so, you know, it's just interesting because like, if we're looking at like, oh, I can't reach out to that person, we don't know what's going on with them and what kind of opportunities they're looking for and ways to grow. Like we're projecting our own stuff, right? Like, oh, we're too small. And if I had looked at her website, I never would have thought, oh, I could reach out to her, because I would have thought, why would she want to do like my little virtual summit? Right. She came to me because she saw what I was doing as an opportunity to like slightly head her business in a different direction. So you never know.
Yeah, that's true. And it's ironic because I hired a marketing expert for my online. I'm doing a virtual summit too for these speakers. And the first speaker that came to mind was a sales expert. And I thought, man, he would be great to get, but I think he's really busy. I make all these excuses in my mind, of course, you know. And so I posted on my LinkedIn page and said, hey, I'm looking for speakers for these different categories. He was the first person to submit the application. And I was just like, oh my gosh, really? So that was just incredible. And here I'm convincing myself, well, if I ask him, I'll probably say he's too busy. And then he filled it out without me even asking. I'm like, so you just don't know.
I love it. That's kind of what we were talking about, like little synchronicities and things appearing. You know, it's like you were ready for him to come in. And I think, you know, like the desire to have him out is like part of what pulled him in.
Yeah. So it's just, I mean, we've kind of worked together. I've written some articles for his online magazine. So, I mean, I have a little bit of a connection there anyways, but it just was crazy to think, you know, I didn't ask thinking he's too busy, and then he fills it out. So, I mean, you just never know. So learning to get past our own kind of, you know, mindset traps, I guess I'll call them. Yeah. If you can get past that, it's pretty incredible. So for someone to work with you to help them get past that, I can't even imagine the potential that they could be looking at once they work with you and are able to say, okay, this is what I learned from Heather. I'm going to implement this. And then, like you said, all of a sudden things are going to start popping up in their existence that they didn't see before.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing to watch. I'm so glad we're on the same sort of, I guess, wavelength about, you know, helping people, but then also getting them to a point where things that are unanticipated in their lives start to happen, because you know, we know that we can like deliver certain results, but then when they get things that they don't even know were possible for them, that's like so freaking exciting.
Yeah. And then they're like, holy cow, like they're blown away. Then as a coach, you're like, oh my God, this is fantastic. Like, you know, you get so excited for somebody else's experience.
Yeah, it's really fun. I love it.
That's pretty awesome. So if you want to contact Heather, you can go to theenergysynergist.com. And do you have a form there? Is that what you had said?
I do have a form for transformation call if someone's looking for one-on-one support. And then at the beginning of the year, I'll also be starting up my group program. Again, it's an 8-week program to help people shift out of anxiety. And so I personally like working in groups. I get a lot out of it. So if anybody watching knows that they're a group kind of program person, I have that option as well in just a couple of months.
And I love group programs for people because some people just aren't comfortable doing the one-on-one. So the group, they can kind of get the information and hopefully they get the courage to participate then, inside that group. So I love when people offer those that group scenario because they're going to get a lot out of it. I have no doubt.
Yeah.
And then they can share with each other because even like you and I had never met, but yet we've had a lot of the same experiences or very similar experiences. So when you put people like that in a group, they're just going to feel a lot more confident in sharing what they're going through and, helping one another.
Yeah, it is nice to be with people who understand what each other is experiencing, particularly with anxiety, because a lot of times people feel really isolated and they feel like they're the only ones. And then they find out, oh, wait, even though this person may not seem the same as me, if you were just, have a brief conversation, there's a lot of similarities and there is a lot of power in group dynamic. It's different than working in one-on-one. I mean, I've worked with one-on-one coaches and I've been part of group programs as well. And I love both of them, but there's something about like group energy and support where you're kind of all cheering each other on, but also there's energy of it. There's like the energy of the group that helps like kind of, make a container and hold space.
Yes.
So people can have, a lot of results.
Well, and there's a lot of support there. Like you said, you're cheering each other on. And sometimes people don't feel that support with the people that are physically around them, their family and friends, especially if they're entrepreneurs and coaches and things like that. Sometimes we feel very alone in our world. And so having a group that's cheering you on as you're going through this transformation, I think that's just fabulous that you're offering that.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So this podcast will be uploaded to YouTube as well as I pull the audio and I will put it right up on the podcast or on the podcast site. So it'll be on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, all of those, popular podcast players. And I don't edit. So if you're listening today live, if you go onto the podcast, you're going to hear exactly what you heard today. I like messy. I like it. I don't need it to be perfect or anything. So thank you so much for joining me today, Heather. I think you're going to help so many people, and I'm sure you have already, but I'm excited for the people who tune in here and listen either live or on the replay. I'm excited for them to head to your website, fill out the form, and get some expertise from you.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And I love what you just said is a great summary. It's like we give you permission to just be messy. That's perfect.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah. Life is messy. My dogs will bark. And if you have a cat meow, I mean, that's life. That's day to day. Nobody's perfect. And that's why I don't edit. Because I just think, this is what it is. So this is what I want to give everybody so they don't feel it's authentic then. If stuff happens, my husband might pop in and say, hey, I'm leaving or whatever. Okay. Well, that's part of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you. And I hope all of the listeners or watchers, had some kind of insights today.
Yeah, I think they probably have for sure. So we'll be back here next Monday at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. Bye, everyone.